If I told you that one of the most important battles for the soul of the Roman Empire was won by pointing a finger at Kerala, India, you'd probably think I was looking at the entirely wrong map.
Right. I mean, it sounds completely counterintuitive.
It really does. But welcome to today's deep dive. I'm your host, and we have a really fascinating stack of research tailored specifically for you today.
And I'm the resident expert here to help unpack it all, because we are going to challenge a very common historical assumption today.
Yeah, exactly. Because, when you think about 4th century Christianity, you almost certainly picture the Mediterranean. Like you picture guys in togas, marble columns, intense Roman politics.
Maybe an emperor looking stern on a throne somewhere.
Right.
It is a profoundly Greco-Roman mental map. I mean, our standard history education conditions us to default to cities like Rome, Athens, Alexandria, and Constantinople.
We basically treat the borders of the Roman Empire as the borders of the known world.
We do. And that's exactly why the sources we're unpacking today are just so mind-bending.
So our mission today is to explore how one of the most famous figures of that era, a 4th century heavy hitter named Gregory of Nazianzus.
Literally known to history as the theologian, by the way.
Right, the guy was a big deal. We're looking at how he used the existence of a vibrant, thriving Christian community in India to win high-stakes theological and cultural wars right in the heart of Constantinople.
It's honestly incredible. Uncovering this feels like finding an ancient global network that was just hiding in plain sight.
It really does. It's a massive shortcut for you to understand that late antiquity was vastly more interconnected than we usually give it credit for.
And the late 4th century is the perfect stage for this kind of revelation. You have two massive historical currents crashing into each other.
Okay, set the stage for us. What's going on?
Well, on one hand, there's the rigorous crystallization of dogma. The church is hashing out the absolute core tenets of its theology.
Figuring out what they actually believe on paper.
Exactly. But simultaneously, there's this expanding geographical consciousness. I mean, intellectuals are realizing the world does not stop at the Roman frontier.
And Gregory is standing right at the intersection of those two currents.
He really is. He's pushing a vision of a truly universal, orderless church.
Let's get into the mechanics of how he actually did that, starting with his motivations. Because, Gregory wasn't just writing a travelogue about the Malabar coast.
No, not at all. He was wielding India as a political weapon.
And to see how that weapon worked, we need to look at a specific speech he delivered. This is around the year 380 CE, and it's known as Oration 33, or Against the Arians.
Yes, that's the one.
But before we get to the speech itself, we really need to establish the stakes for you. The research mentions Gregory is fighting a culture war against a faction called the Arians.
Right.
For someone who doesn't hold a degree in late antiquity theology, what is the actual friction point here? Like, why do they hate each other so much?
So it boils down to a debate over the fundamental nature of the universe, specifically the nature of Jesus.
Okay.
The Arians, who were following a thinker named Arius, they argue that Jesus was a created being. He had a beginning, and therefore he was subordinate to God the Father.
And Gregory's side.
Gregory and his community, the Nicene Christians, they argued the exact opposite. They believed Jesus was co-eternal with the Father, uncreated, and of the exact same substance.
To modern ears, that might sound like academic hair splitting.
Oh, totally.
But in Constantinople, this was a battle for reality itself. And crucially, Gregory's side is actually losing that battle locally.
Big time. The sources paint a picture of the Nicene Christians as this mocked, marginalized minority in the imperial capital.
The Arians basically have it all. They have the wealth, they have the political power, the backing of the elite, and they just have the sheer numbers on the streets.
They hold all the local cards, yeah.
Yeah.
The Arians are not shy about using their majorities and their beautiful basilicas as, proof that God favors their theology.
Right. So if I'm Gregory and I'm losing the local numbers game in Constantinople, my instinct would be to, argue the theology harder or aggressively petition the emperor.
That's what most people would do.
But he doesn't do that. He goes for a completely different geopolitical angle. He invokes what scholars call the apostolic lots.
Yeah, he flips the script on what constitutes true power.
How so?
Well, in Oration 33, Gregory essentially tells his opponents that their local wealth means nothing. He reminds them that the original apostles didn't conquer the world with, imperial patronage or massive bank accounts.
They were poor strangers who won through spiritual authority.
Exactly. And to prove his point, he lists the specific regions assigned to each apostle to evangelize.
He says, What had Paul in common with the Gentiles? Luke with Achaia. But then he drops the hammer. He pairs Thomas with India.
Yep, Thomas with India.
This feels exactly like a modern startup trying to fight a local corporate monopoly by flexing their global user base.
That is a perfect analogy.
Like Gregory is standing up in the Capitol and saying, look, you Aryans might have the city center right now, but we have a network that stretches all the way to the Indian Ocean.
Right. He redefines legitimacy from a local scale to a global scale.
I love the strategy, but why was that specific flex so devastating to his opponents?
Because by pointing to Thomas, an apostle famous for his initial doubt, who then allegedly travels to the absolute edge of the known world, Gregory establishes a narrative of unstoppable reach. He's telling his marginalized flock and his arrogant opponents that Nicene Christianity is not some tiny fringe group in Constantinople.
It's part of an ancient, resilient network.
Exactly. A network that thrives in the most alien environments imaginable. It just completely undercuts the Arians' boast of local political superiority.
Okay, I have to be a skeptic for a second, though.
Yeah, for it.
Because as I dug into the geography of these sources, things get a little murky.
Yeah, ancient geography can be a headache.
Right. In the ancient world, geographical terminology was incredibly fluid. Sometimes the word India was just a buzzword for the edge of the earth.
It was a very elastic term.
There's a writer mentioned in the research, Rufinus. He talks about a bishop named Frumentius being ordained for the Indians, but historically we know Frumentius was actually serving the Aksumite kingdom in Ethiopia.
Right, which is Africa.
Exactly. So India could literally mean Africa. How do we know Gregory wasn't just being dramatic and gesturing vaguely at the horizon?
Well, that is a highly debated question among historians, precisely because of that fluidity between what they called inner and outer India.
So how do we narrow it down?
The corroborating context strongly suggests Gregory meant the actual subcontinent. We could look at his peer, St. Jerome, who was writing around the exact same time.
Okay, what does Jerome say?
Jerome also champions the idea that Thomas went to India, but he provides a crucial specific detail. Jerome states that Thomas went to preach to the Brahmins.
Oh, wow. Okay, that changes things. Brahmins points unmistakably to South Asia. You really can't misinterpret that as Ethiopia or Arabia.
You really can't. Furthermore, we have to look at the practical reality of 4th century logistics. The Mediterranean and the Indian subcontinent were intimately connected by highly lucrative maritime trade.
Like the spice trade.
Exactly. Merchant ships would leave Roman ports in Egypt, catch the seasonal monsoon winds, and sail directly across the Arabian Sea to the Malabar coast of India.
And they were spending a lot of money doing it, too.
Oh, absolutely. Pliny the Elder famously complained about the massive drain of Roman gold flowing eastward to buy Indian spices and silks.
So it wasn't a mythical, inaccessible fairyland to them. It was a place where their neighbors went to do business.
Yes. And Gregory was an elite, highly educated guy. I mean, he studied in Athens.
Right. He would have read classical Greek geographers discussing the gymnosophists, which is the Greek term for Indian philosophers.
He absolutely knew what he's talking about. When Gregory said Thomas with India, he was pointing to a real, known cultural heavyweight.
A land famous in the Greek mind for its ancient, rigorous wisdom.
Exactly. He was declaring that even this distant civilization had been brought into the fold of the Christian Trinity.
Right. Assuming we were talking about the actual Indian subcontinent, why Thomas?
What do you mean?
Well, if you're building this global network argument, how did Thomas become the undisputed patron saint of India in the first place?
Okay. To understand that, we have to examine a 3rd century apocryphal text called the Acts of Judas Thomas.
Right. This is the most robust foundation for early Indian Christian tradition. And I gotta say, the story in this text is completely wild.
It reads like an adventure novel.
It really does. It claims Thomas did not want to go to India, so Jesus literally sells him as a slave to a merchant named Haben.
Yep.
And Haben is apparently looking for an architect to work for an Indian king named Gondophares.
That's the story.
Now, for centuries, European historians looked at the Acts of Thomas and just dismissed it as pure fiction.
They thought it was completely made up. It had Gnostic undertones, it was highly embellished, and King Gondophares was assumed to be a fairy tale king.
Until one of the greatest archaeological vindications of the 19th century.
This is my favorite part.
British colonial administrators and archaeologists in the Punjab region started digging up ancient coins and inscriptions. And right there, stamped on the coins, is the name King Gondophares.
They proved he was a real historical figure.
And not just a real figure, but an Indo-Parthian king who ruled in the mid-1st century CE. That is the exact historical window when the apostles were active.
I mean, it doesn't prove that Thomas built the palace for him, of course,
All right, right.
but it proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that the author of that 3rd century text had access to incredibly accurate, localized historical memory regarding the Indian political landscape of the 1st century.
But here's where the sources present a real puzzle for you. There is a completely competing tradition about who went to India.
Yes, there is.
Eusebius and Jerome write that in the 2nd century, a theologian from Alexandria named Pantaenus traveled to India and found an existing community of Christians.
But those Christians didn't claim Thomas.
Exactly. They claimed the Apostle Bartholomew had come to them and even left them a copy of the Gospel of Matthew in Hebrew.
Right.
So if there were two valid historical traditions, Thomas and Bartholomew, why does Gregory put all his chips on Thomas in his big speech?
It comes down to the geopolitical alliances of the time. Gregory was deeply aligned with the Cappadocian and Syriac traditions of the Eastern Church.
And what's their connection to Thomas?
Well, the absolute epicenter of the Thomas tradition was the city of Edessa, which is in modern-day Turkey. In the 3rd century, Thomas's relics were reportedly brought back from India and enshrined in a massive, celebrated basilica in Edessa.
So he was essentially the patron saint of the Syriac-speaking Christian world.
Yes, you have massive literary figures like Ephraim the Syrian writing these beautiful, widely sung hymns celebrating Thomas.
Oh, I saw that. He calls him the sun who illumined the dark bride of India.
It's exactly. By the 4th century, the Thomas narrative was an established liturgical fact for the Eastern Church.
So Gregory choosing Thomas was a very conscious alignment with that thriving Syriac-speaking Eastern network.
He was anchoring his argument in a tradition that his audience would immediately recognize as ancient and powerful.
Okay, so Gregory brilliantly uses this Indian connection to win internal church debates against the Arians.
Right.
But the research shows he also turned this geopolitical weapon against the ultimate external threat, which was the emperor himself.
Emperor Julian, known to history as Julian the Apostate.
Yeah, he took the throne and basically attempted to systematically dismantle Christianity and restore paganism to the Roman Empire.
And his strategy wasn't just physical persecution. It was intellectual warfare.
Julian issues an edict banning Christians from teaching Greek literature and rhetoric. He essentially tries to copyright the Greek language.
That's a great way to put it.
He argues that Greek culture, philosophy, and truth are intrinsically linked to the Greek gods. If Christians reject the gods, they have no right to use the language.
He wants to intellectually isolate them. Julian is arguing that high culture and divine truth are proprietary to the Greco-Roman world.
Which brings us to Gregory's response in a document called Oration 4. He fires back at the emperor, and his mechanism for dismantling Julian's argument is, once again, India.
He goes right back to the map.
Gregory basically argues that truth is open source software. It belongs to everyone, everywhere.
He makes a profound philosophical pivot here. Gregory argues that the logos, the ultimate divine truth, or the word, transcends any single culture.
And his ultimate proof of concept is the distant Indian philosophers, the Gymnosophists.
Right.
He argues that if these Indian philosophers who have absolutely nothing to do with Athens or Roman culture can receive and understand the Christian gospel, then it proves Christianity isn't just some provincial Roman cult borrowing Greek words.
It proves it's a universal philosophy. Gregory completely dismantles Julian's cultural imperialism.
He's asserting that truth does not need a Greek passport.
Exactly. This universalism is central to Gregory's whole theology. For him, the divine is the source and goal of all humanity, period, regardless of whether you live in a marble villa in Constantinople or on the Malabar coast.
Now, we've spent a lot of time dissecting the high-level rhetoric of the Roman Empire. We have Gregory dunking on the Arians and dismantling the emperor.
It's all very theoretical up to this point.
Exactly. I want to bring this down to the ground, because if Gregory's making these massive claims, we really have to ask, was he defending a phantom idea, or was there a real, breathing community in India backing him up?
It was far from a phantom. The 4th century, which is the exact time Gregory is writing, is considered the golden age for the documentation of Indian Christianity.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was a very real, very robust community known as the St. Thomas Christians, or Nazianzus, centered in Kerala, South India.
Their internal tradition traces their founding to Thomas landing at the port of Muziris in 52 CE. The lore says he converted Brahmin families and local Jewish settlers, which actually tracks historically since there were Aramaic-speaking Jewish merchant communities in those Indian ports.
Yep, the trade routes made that entirely possible.
But the 4th century is when they absolutely explode onto the historical record.
They become deeply integrated into the global church hierarchy. For example, look at the Council of Nicaea in 325 CE.
This is the council that basically defined mainstream Orthodox Christianity.
Right. If you examine the signatures of the attendees, there's a signature from John, Bishop of Persia in India.
Wow. They literally had a seat at the table where the core tenets of the religion were being decided.
They really did. And then just 20 years later, in 345 CE, there is a massive demographic event.
What happens then?
A merchant named Thomas of Cana leads a migration of 72 Mesopotamian families from the Middle East directly to the Malabar coast. This includes a bishop, priests, and deacons.
It's a massive injection of Syriac culture into South India.
And it leads to a cultural synthesis that is vital to understand.
I really want to dig into how this actually worked day to day, because bringing a Middle Eastern religion into a rigid Hindu caste system sounds incredibly volatile.
It does sound like a recipe for disaster.
Right? How did they integrate without destroying themselves or the local culture?
Well, they managed it through a brilliant social adaptation. They maintained their faith in Christ and kept the Syriac language for their liturgy, which tethered them to the Mesopotamian Christian world.
But culturally and socially.
They became thoroughly Indian. They adopted the customs of their high-caste Hindu neighbors.
The sources mention them wearing the sacred thread, the Upanayana, which is a major marker of high caste status in Hinduism.
Right. They also kept specific dietary laws and purification rituals. They essentially became a recognized caste of merchants.
I suppose the local rulers wanted the wealth that these traders brought on the monsoon winds, so they allowed them to slip into the social hierarchy.
Exactly. They created this incredible hybrid: Indian in culture, Christian in faith, Syrian in liturgy.
And we have the hard archaeological proof to back up how influential they became in that society, don't we?
We do. Archaeologists have found what are known as St. Thomas crosses throughout the region.
What are those exactly?
They're these granite bas-relief crosses inscribed with Pahlavi script, which is a Middle Iranian language. Epigraphic studies of a cross at Alangad suggest it could date back to the 4th century.
So it's a physical stone marker of that exact Persian-Indian connection.
Yes. But the most impressive piece of evidence is the Tazakad Sasanam.
Right. What exactly is this document?
It's a stone inscription dating from around 340 to 360 CE.
Right, during Gregory's lifetime?
Exactly. It officially records the local rulers granting special rights and privileges to Christian merchants.
That is wild. It proves they weren't just a tiny hidden sect whispering in the shadows. They had immense economic power, legal standing, and royal protection.
Yes.
Which means when Gregory of Nazianzus stands in Constantinople and talks about Thomas with India, he isn't spinning a myth.
Not at all. He is pointing to a verified, thriving, multicultural reality.
Wow.
When you synthesize all of this, Gregory's ecumenical vision was entirely grounded in the geopolitical reality of his day.
He wasn't just speaking in metaphors.
Right. He, along with peers like Jerome in Bethlehem, looked at this flourishing Indian church and realized that the map of salvation was drastically larger than the Roman Empire.
They leveraged this multicultural Eastern church to remind the arrogant Mediterranean world that they were not the center of the spiritual universe.
Exactly.
What this means for you, the listener, is that we have to constantly question the historical maps we've been handed. The ancient world was vastly more dynamic and diverse than the simple Rome versus barbarians narrative we are spoon-fed in school.
It was a deeply interconnected world. Early Christianity was fundamentally a borderless movement.
And I want to leave you with one final mind-bending nugget to chew on about just how far those borders eventually stretch. Because this Byzantine fascination with India didn't just fade away after Gregory died.
No, it took on a whole new life.
Centuries later, it birthed a massively popular medieval religious romance called Barlaam and Ioseph.
It is one of the most fascinating texts in medieval literature.
It's the story of an Indian prince named Ioseph who converts to Christianity. And the text of the story is heavily encrusted with direct quotes lifted straight from Gregory of Nazianzus.
But historians eventually realized something incredible about that text.
Right. The plot of Barlaam and Ioseph is actually a Christianized adaptation of the life of the Buddha.
The layers of cultural exchange required for that to happen are just staggering.
It's unbelievable. Gregory's fierce defense of a universal open-source truth, his argument that Indian wisdom and Christian theology could speak to one another, it ended up providing the exact intellectual scaffolding needed to merge the story of the Buddha with Christian literature.
And that specific story kept the mystique of India alive in the Western imagination for centuries.
It really just goes to show, when you think you're looking at a clean, contained history of the Roman Empire, you might actually be looking at a map that leads all the way to the Buddha.
It's a great reminder to always look past the borders.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We will catch you next time.